Welcome back to Smoked BBQ Source. I'm Ricer, and today we're doing up a pineapple bourbon ham. I picked up an 8-pound Carabuda half ham from Snake River Farms. This Carabuda ham is bred from 100% Berkshire hog, and I'm telling you, this is what ham is supposed to taste like. Carabuda actually means black pig, so I guess you could say it's kind of the Wagyu of pork. Today, for convenience, I'm using my Traeger Timberline XL because we're gonna make up a wonderful pineapple bourbon glaze to put on the outside of this Carabuda ham. The first thing you gotta do is we gotta get it out of the package. This next step is optional, but I feel if it's not a spiral cut ham, it's always good to score it up a little bit, and I just did some 1-inch crisscross cuts throughout that whole half ham. This way you get a little bit more of that sweet and spicy goodness on that edge. And don't worry, if you accidentally cut off a little chunk, well, that's pitmaster's privilege. FYI, when you're actually starting to coat up that ham with this glaze, it's gonna get kind of messy inside that pit. So I always suggest you grab a sheet pan, throw some aluminum foil inside it, and then put in a cooling rack. This way, you got a lot less to clean up inside that pit. Underneath almost every single half bone in ham, there is going to be a little bit of protection on the bottom of that bone. Make sure you get that off before you put it in your smoker. I decided to use Pitmaster's Pick from Smoked BBQ Source to season up this ham today. And don't be afraid to coat up that ham nice and thick. And the reason why I chose Pitmaster's Pick, it's got some nice big old chili flakes in it, and there's nothing better than a little bit of heat with some sweet. But to get it to adhere to the actual outside of this ham, go ahead and put on about a tablespoon of olive oil and spread it out nice and evenly. This way it'll help tack that rub right to that ham. And it's always good to give it a little bit of a patty-pat-pat-pat. Now while our meat sets and sweats, let's fire up that pellet grill. Because I'm making up this sauce today, I'm gonna use my Timberline XL because it has an induction plate right on the pit. I can do everything in one spot. I don't have to run into the kitchen. Now, as far as temps go, I either run it at 300 or 325 degrees. When it comes to reheating a ham in a pellet grill, it's not really important on the temperature. It's more about how fast you wanna get it done. Place that ham right in the center of the pit, and I typically like to get a probe in the middle of it because that's gonna give me my coldest spot. But just make sure that you keep it a couple inches away from the bone. You don't wanna get any odd readings. We're gonna smoke this ham until it reaches an internal temperature of 135 degrees. But every 25 degrees, I'm gonna rotate it 180 degrees to help us get even temperatures throughout this whole ham. Remember, a ham, it's kind of a funny shape, so those outer edges are gonna get a little bit more done than the actual center. When you're rotating that ham, make sure you have some really good protective gloves on because that pan is gonna be hot. Once you reach an internal temperature of 110 degrees on that ham, it's time to put a go on that glaze. This pineapple bourbon glaze consists of a half a cup of Pitmaster's Pick or whatever you're using today, but make sure you got a little bit of heat in it. Toss in 1 cup of brown sugar, 1/2 cup of dark molasses, 1/2 cup of your favorite bourbon, 2 tablespoons of red wine vinegar, and finally 1 jar of pineapple preserve. I'm using 10.5 ounces, but you can go up to 12. Now you're gonna wanna stir this up pretty dang good because it can start to burn at the bottom of the pan. If you notice that it's a little thick when you're stirring, add some extra bourbon. Nobody's gonna complain about adding a little bit more bourbon. Once you've reached a small little boil and all those sugars and spices have dissolved, turn it off so it can sit there and rest. This pineapple glaze recipe will easily be able to coat up a whole ham too. You can actually take a little bit of that glaze and drizzle it across all those slices when you're serving it. When your ham has reached an internal temperature of 115 to 120 degrees, I started to coat it up. After that first layer, about every 15 minutes I put on another coat. The more coats the better, but if it's a very large ham, you certainly are gonna wanna wait until you've reached about 125 degrees internal temperature because that sweetness is gonna start to brown and start to really crystallize and get dark. But make sure you get at least 3 coats on it because it's gonna add a ton of flavor to that ham. Once I've reached right around 135 degrees, I pull that pig out of the pit because I'm gonna throw some aluminum foil, lightly tint it, and let it rest for at least a half an hour. This way that heat will start to even out out throughout that whole ham. For some of you that are wondering, I always plan for about 15 minutes a pound when I'm cooking a ham, and this one took just a little under 2.5 hours. And that's because when I first started this cook, I was running that Traeger at 300 degrees. But just look at that ham. That looks like some really good deliciousness. This Karabuta ham is rested for 30 minutes. I am starving. Let's dive into it. Take off our foil and voila. One thing about having the crisscross is that you can use those actually kind of for a guide to lop off a hunk. Look at that juice. We're starting to drip, and that's a good sign. This is a stuck pig, literally. Two things that are a must is that I gotta have some of this crispy edge and get towards that center because yummy. So we're gonna take this part right here, lop it again, and let's just try a bite. Wow, by far the most juiciest ham I've ever had. And this is towards the outer edge. Wow. And with this pineapple bourbon glaze, you get a little bit of sweet and heat in every bite. So if you've been looking at Snake River Farms and been thinking, should I try it? I'm highly gonna suggest you try this ham. Karabuta. Just sounds tough too. 100% the yum. Wow. I think if you learned anything today is that cooking a ham is pretty simple, especially if you're doing it on a pellet grill. We'll have links in the description below where you can get your very own Karabuta ham from Snake River Farms. Plus, other things that I used for this cook. Now I appreciate you watching, and we'll see you in the next video.